Today on CityCast Pittsburgh, Allegheny County passed its budget for next year. We're talking about why you're going to see an increase in your property taxes. A state Supreme Court ruling means local gun reform probably isn't in the cards. And Trump's doubling down on his pledge to block the U.S. Steel deal. It's December 6th, the Friday News Roundup. I'm Mallory Falk, and here's what Pittsburgh's talking about. I'm with CityCast producer Sophia Lowe. Hey, Sophia.
Hey, Mallory. Thank you for letting me kick it off with some TV time.
Of course.
I was really pumped to discover that the trailer for The Pit came out a couple weeks ago. It's a new medical drama coming to Max in January.
Max, formerly known as HBO.
Yeah. There's a lot of people involved who helped make ER. They're also making The Pit, set in Pittsburgh, also because it's an emergency room. So, they call that The Pit. So that includes Noah Weil, who played John Carter in ER, and he's going to be a lead character in The Pit.
Yeah, we talked about this when this show first got announced. We all came up with our pitches for a very Pittsburgh-centric storyline. I think my favorite, this might have been yours, Sophia, was a love affair between someone who works for AHN and someone who works for UPMC.
Yeah, that sounds like something I would come up with.
I'm assuming that is not a storyline that surfaces in this trailer. I haven't seen it yet.
No, here's part of the trailer and what's actually going to be in the show.
Being here means no matter how good you are, or how hard you try, someone might die. That's called being an emergency medicine doctor. Welcome to The Pit. Let's go save some lives.
I just feel like there's 100 trillion billion medical dramas on air already. And it's very cool that in this trailer, you're seeing shots of downtown Pittsburgh, the doctors going up on the rooftop of a hospital and seeing the Pittsburgh skyline in the background. But outside of that, this looks and sounds to me like every other medical drama that's aired in the past 30 years.
Yeah, I'm less excited about it now. I'm still probably going to watch, but it's an interesting concept that it's 15 episodes. It's supposed to take place over a 15-hour ER shift. But I'm not in this for the medical stuff. I'm here for weird romantic tension, and you're not getting that in just one shift.
Also, I guess I don't know how it's going to play out, but if it's really just 15 hours inside of the hospital and that's all you see, that means we're not going to get iconic scenes set in, somebody choking on
Permane sandwich because it's too big, too many fries.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know, this makes me feel like it's going to be less Pittsburgh than I was hoping for.
Yeah, I'll give you my review because, like I said, I will probably end up watching anyway.
I stuck with Grey's Anatomy way longer than I should have, so I will at least give the premiere a shot.
So what is actual news this week?
Yeah, just slightly more important than the trailer drop for The Pit is the fact that we have a county budget for 2025.
Woo, yeah, it passed. And this has been a really big contentious topic for the past few weeks because this budget includes the first property tax increase in more than a decade.
Yes. If you've been listening to our show, you know that our county executive, Sarah Innamorato, proposed this increase because the county really needs money. She inherited a budget from her predecessor, Rich Fitzgerald, that has this huge deficit. For this year, it's $81 million.
Wow.
And federal COVID relief money that has helped kind of keep us afloat the past few years that we've used to plug gaps, that is ending this year. So Innamorato has been saying that, without this increase in property taxes, the county would have to cut really critical services.
Right. We talked to her about the county budget back in October, and she provided a bunch of examples of things that could be cut. So, for example, no bus service after 8 p.m., no T service at all over the weekend, cutting childcare services. She talked specifically about having fewer people to answer 911 calls and what that means when that happens.
I've been in states, Florida, where you call 911 and they place you on hold.
If I called 911 and I was placed on hold, I would just start shrieking. It would not be pretty. So again, these are like really important services that keep people safe, keep people housed. People are getting care in our county.
Yeah.
And, you know, we need all of this to function. And that's why we're getting this tax increase.
Yeah, that's something that Innamorato has really been stressing ever since she first proposed the budget earlier this year with this tax increase. But the budget that just passed, it's actually a compromise budget. The increase is lower than what she initially proposed, but it is higher than this counter proposal that some county council members originally put forward. So the increase that just passed, it is raising the property tax by 1.7 mils.
That's such a weird measurement. I had never heard of a mill before we started reporting this.
Yes, for anyone out there like Sophia, who's like, what the heck is a mill? This doesn't make sense to me. Basically, 1 mil is equal to $1 for every $1,000 of your home's assessed value. To make that a little easier to understand, because I know that's
still confusing.
Still tough. Yeah. So like right now in Allegheny County, the median home value is about $110,000. So with this tax increase, someone whose home is at that median value, they will pay about $13 more in property taxes every month. That stat helped me really wrap my head around all this.
Yeah, me too. And a reminder that, you know, the assessed value of a house is different than the market price or what you may have paid for your house. So if you own a house, look it up on Zillow right now and see these estimates like $350,000. That is not the same thing as the assessed value of your home.
Right. The assessed value is often lower. And I think this is all really important to understand because if you're a homeowner and you hear like my property taxes are going up by 36%, that sounds like a lot. But you've got to look at 36% of what? You
know, my taxes going up almost 40% feels a lot more alarming than I need to pay an extra $13 a month, especially when that money is going to those services I mentioned above. Like, I would happily pay $13 a month. So, you know, I'm still getting bus service. That's something that's really important to me as someone who does not own a car.
Yes, that adds up to much less than the price of a vehicle, for example. But I mean, I don't want to minimize. There are people and families that are stretched really thin right now. For some people, this is going to be tough. Like they don't have room to stretch their budget. And Innamorato herself acknowledged this when we talked to her.
I know that families are struggling right now and bills are higher, but not a but an and, like this is not my first choice. But it is our last resort because I also know how vital all of those things are to people. And we're also setting ourselves up for long-term success as a region because all of this leads into our ability to grow our economy and to grow our population.
Okay, Mallory, but I want to back up for a moment. You said this was a compromise plan. Remind us what Innamorato originally proposed and whether she thinks that this compromise is actually going to prevent all of these cuts.
Yeah, so originally she wanted to raise property taxes by 2.2 mils. So that would have meant someone with that house assessed at the median value in Allegheny County, again, that's a little over $110,000. They would be paying $15 more a month instead of $13 more. And then some council members came up with this counter proposal to raise the tax rate by 1.3 mils. So this final plan, 1.7 mils, it really meets in the middle. Overall, the county is going to have a $1.17 billion operating budget. And Innamorato says that this really accomplishes a lot of what she'd hoped. Like it means no one's going to get laid off. Essential services are going to be fully funded.
Ooh,
so
I can call 911.
Yes, you can call 911 and get the services you need. I'm trying to imagine what 911 hold music even sounds like. Like, are you having to listen to insufferable music?
Like little elevator, weird jazz?
Yeah, yes, as you're like on the precipice of a medical emergency. Anyway, don't have to worry about that. Things like public safety, public works, and human services, like all those departments will be fully funded. And this budget will also allow the county to preserve some programs that started during the pandemic that were funded by the federal government that have been really popular and the county doesn't want to have to get rid of when that federal funding ends. So for example, like we now have an emergency rental assistance program for people who, you know, are coming up short and are facing eviction. And so that's something that the county, you know, hadn't funded in the past, but now that it's here, officials, you know, don't want to take it away. It's a thing that's benefited a lot of people.
So we just talked about all the services that are going to stay because of this property tax increase. But, you said this was a compromise plan. This is not what Innamorato initially budgeted for. What are we losing, or what are we not getting?
Yeah, so a lot of it is just less money to put towards certain things. So, for example, this budget is not putting as much money in our rainy day fund as Innamorato had initially hoped. Mm-hmm. That fund has really been drained down over the years. Like, we've had this deficit. It's been used to plug holes. And so now the goal is to replenish it, to build it back up. So we have that money for a rainy day. So the county is still going to put money into it, but just not as much as she'd originally proposed when she proposed that, higher tax increase. Mm-hmm. There also isn't as much money going toward children and youth programs as there had been in her initial budget. Yeah. I mean, again, there is still money going toward that, but it's not going to get like the amount she'd initially hoped for. And then she had wanted to increase the homestead exemption, which is essentially like a tax discount for someone who owns and lives in their home full time.
Right. So like if you have a second property that you rent out or something, you wouldn't get a discount on the second house.
Right, exactly. So she had wanted to increase that, to kind of help soften the blow of this tax increase. But the compromise plan leaves that homestead exemption at the amount it is right now. So that's $18,000 instead of increasing it to $21,000.
This is the part that's kind of disappointing to me because it sounds like we really need that tax money, but also at the same time, the price of everything's increasing.
Right.
So people are worried about that. So I thought this was a really good in between. Like, yes, we need to take more money, but we're going to give you a tax break somewhere else.
Yeah. So I think that is definitely a big change between what she initially laid out and what we're actually going to see in the coming year. There's some other changes between her initial proposal and this new budget. We are going to link to some great reporting from Public Source in our show notes if you want to dig more into those differences. But one other thing that's worth mentioning here, if you're kind of curious about that counter proposal for the lower tax increase, the 1.3 mil, if you're wondering, like, why couldn't we have gone with that? One big point of contention there was about funding for the Department of Human Services, which it's the largest department in the county, and it's really kind of the safety net for our most vulnerable residents. So the counter proposal called for putting less money toward that department. But the thing is, there's a program where the state matches the funds that the county puts into DHS. So I don't want to get too deep into the math here, but that proposal would have cut $4 million from our county Department of Human Services.
Big number.
Big number. But also because of how the state matching program works, that would have meant that we also left about $16 million in state funding on the table.
Whoa. So like $20 million total. That's a lot of money. This seems like maybe a couple extra dollars is worth individuals putting in for this kind of service.
Yeah. So, I mean, that was a real sticking point for some people. And this compromise plan, it restores almost all of the funding that Innamorato initially proposed for Allegheny County DHS.
Nice. So I know, that initial proposal, a bunch of county council members were like, whoa, we can't vote for a tax increase. And there's been a lot of back and forth since then. So how did these votes actually play out? Like, in the end, were all these council members convinced that we needed a tax increase?
For the budget to pass, 10 council members out of 15 had to vote for it, and exactly 10 members did, so it just passed. A handful voted against it. That includes David Bonarati. He's a Democrat who represents a bunch of Pittsburgh neighborhoods. He said, like, the city of Pittsburgh isn't in great financial shape. Pittsburgh Public Schools isn't in great financial shape. He thinks other tax rates are going to have to go up. Mm-hmm. So he said this tax increase would be, quote unquote, the levee breaking. And he's concerned about that.
I mean, everyone's not really in great financial shape right now. So I think that is a concern that I also share.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of that, Sophia, like Allegheny County and the city of Pittsburgh, we are definitely not alone. Like lots of cities and counties all over the country are in really tough financial shape right now and trying to figure out how to provide essential services now that, federal COVID funding is drying up. Mm-hmm. The Trib, in their coverage of all this, noted that Westmoreland County raised its property tax more than 32% last year. Oh. Officials in Armstrong County proposed a 33% tax increase for next year.
So spots like literally right around us, not even just like across the state or around the country.
Yes.
Everyone's
our
doing
neighbors
this.
Too.
Okay.
Yeah. It's one of those situations where, like, It's never great to hear that like other people aren't doing well either, but it's not like Allegheny County uniquely bungled this or something. Like this is just where our country is right now.
And it also just mirrors a lot of what individuals are going through with like rising food prices and everything. Like the costs are going up for us. The costs are also going up for the county.
Yeah,
Sucks
exactly.
that it's falling on us, but I guess the
Right.
money's got to come from somewhere. And like I've said so many times, I will give you money so you will pick up my 911 call.
But okay, so I mentioned that not all county council members voted to pass the budget. But in terms of people who did, I wanted to play a clip from Nick Futulis. He actually got pretty emotional as he explained why he was voting in favor of the budget. I thought it was worth hearing what he had to say.
How can you say no to senior citizens that need us? How can you say no to children? It's difficult. It's not an easy choice when you have to raise taxes and you have to deal with the people that pay them and the people that receive the benefits. I've been here 17 years, and this is the most difficult thing I think I've ever done.
So anyway, like I said, we'll link to more detailed reporting on all of this in our show notes. And we will also link to our interview that we did with Inamorado in October that we've been referencing. You can hear more there about kind of how we ended up in this situation in the first place with this huge budget deficit and then her vision for the county in the coming year. Okay, Sophia, what about you? Besides the budget, what do you have your eye on right now?
I am thinking about a case that the PA State Supreme Court recently heard. It was about gun laws, and I'm kind of thinking about how the impact that case is going to have on Pittsburgh. So first, zooming out statewide, it is really hard to pass gun laws here in PA because of our bipartisan legislature.
Right. Democrats control the House, Republicans control the Senate. It's been that way, and it's going to continue to be that way because in the most recent election, Democrats maintained their control of the House, Republicans maintained their control of the Senate. So moving into another split session.
Exactly. But then cities like Pittsburgh and Philly have tried to set up stricter gun laws on their own.
Right. I mean, here in Pittsburgh, after the synagogue shooting in 2018, the city passed 3 gun control ordinances. So this was back when Bill Peduto was mayor. He signed them into law. They included restrictions like bans on assault rifles and high-capacity magazines. But there were legal challenges to these measures. They never got enforced. And then the Commonwealth Court eventually struck them down. I was looking this up because I knew we were going to be talking about guns today. And the judge wrote that state law, quote, preempts any local regulation.
Very legalese.
Yep.
What that means for normal people. There's this rule where cities and municipalities can't have gun laws that are more restrictive than what's at the state level. So, if the state doesn't ban assault rifles, then Pittsburgh can't just go ahead and ban them themselves.
Yeah, which this law seems wild to me. But then I actually, to prepare, I was reading up. I saw some reporting in Spotlight PA that says 42 states actually have this kind of law where local governments can't pass safety measures that are stricter than what the state has in place. So this is, I guess, more common than I would have assumed.
Mm-hmm.
So, Pittsburgh's attempt to create our own gun safety measures got shot down in Commonwealth Court. But Sophia, I know that you've been following a case that made it to the state Supreme Court.
Right. So a couple years ago, Philly, Ceasefire PA, and family members of gun violence victims sued the state. And their argument was that by not allowing local governments to pass their own laws, they were denying people's rights to life and liberty. So like I said, this was led by the other side of the state, but Philly tried to do the same thing with by putting on restrictions to gun laws in their area. So this case with Philly made it all the way to the state Supreme Court, and they just released their ruling. Judges unanimously shot down their argument. So they said that plaintiffs didn't prove that this ban on local gun measures was the cause of gun violence in Philly, and that it isn't the court's job to decide whether state laws are doing enough to prevent gun violence.
Yeah, I mean, I know Pittsburgh leaders were watching this case because they were hoping, if the court ruled in Philly's favor, that would mean that we could also enact gun safety measures, like the ones that we tried to put into effect that got shot down. So it seems like this kind of quashes that. There was a lot of hope riding on this case, not just from these specific plaintiffs.
Pretty much. I read reporting in WESA where local officials said there's not a lot of hope that we could regulate guns at a city level, and this kind of ends plans to appeal that Commonwealth Court ruling about our own attempt at regulating gun laws in Pittsburgh. Also, quick shout out to WESA because they also finalized their union contract. Yay!
Okay, thanks, Sophia, for peppering in some nice positive news here while we're talking about a story that's a little bit rough.
Definitely. But back to the guns, a city councilor, Erica Strausberger, told WSA that she'll be focusing on other things that Pittsburgh already does to reduce gun violence, like after-school programs. That being said, she still wants to see if things can be changed at the state level. She wants to do more lobbying, but she's not really optimistic in the short term. But, fingers crossed that we can continue to chip away and make a little more progress.
Yeah, I mean, again, the state level stuff I think is going to be tough while we have this divided legislature. I mean, this session there were 3 gun bills that passed in the House, but the Senate, didn't even consider them.
Yeah, and we actually talked about some of those on a podcast episode earlier this year, right after the assassination attempt at the Trump rally in Butler County. Vinuri Suriwardena from Public Source actually walked you through those bills, Mallory.
She did, yeah. So one would have required background checks for all gun sales because right now you need a background check for most of them, but you don't actually need a background check for a private sale of a long gun.
And long guns include weapons like AR-15s. This is so wild to me that there are fewer requirements to buy an AR-15 privately than to buy a handgun.
Yes, I was shocked when I learned this. When we talked to Vinuri, she said it's not entirely clear where this comes from, but it seems like it's a carve out so that, people could pass down rifles to other members of their families because there is such a strong hunting tradition in Pennsylvania. That was one that passed in the House, didn't get taken up in the Senate. The state House also passed a red flag law, which would have allowed courts to seize guns from people who are considered to be a danger to themselves or others. And then it also passed a bill that would have banned ghost guns. I will let Vinuri explain what that means.
A ghost gun is a kind of do-it-yourself firearm made from building blocks that are easier to get. Unlike guns made by a federally licensed manufacturer, they don't have serial numbers and are very difficult to trace. Gun safety advocates have called them the fastest growing gun safety problem in this country.
So Democrats have announced that they're going to run those bills again in the upcoming session, and they also want to create...
Luck.
Yeah, I mean, they're persistent if nothing else. They also want to create a Center for Gun Violence Research. Shout out again to Spotlight PA for highlighting all of this. But so it seems like there is continued momentum for change. And in some ways, it might be even stronger now that it's kind of been made very clear by the highest court in our state that change has to happen on the state level. But I don't know, I'm kind of like Erica Strausberger here. I'm not super optimistic about change in the short term. Maybe I'm just jaded because I lived in a state, Texas, that actually expanded access to guns after 2 horrific back-to-back mass shootings. There was a lot of talk about gun safety measures after that, and then the state went ahead and actually made it easier for people to carry guns. But I know that not everybody is as jaded as I am. There are people who really think that change might be possible.
And optimism is important. I read the same story in Spotlight PA you mentioned, and the executive director of Ceasefire PA said there's a few more cases the high court may consider, and he's hoping that these have a different outcome. One case is focused on selling ghost gun parts, and the other one is focused on reporting lost or stolen guns.
Yeah, because I mean, this case was about whether cities and municipalities can try to regulate firearms in general, in total. And so these are a little bit more specific about does this law actually apply to regulating how things get reported by people who don't actually own the guns?
So TBD what's going to happen with those cases or with any proposed legislation in the new year. But with everything else, we're keeping an eye on this. We will bring you any major updates.
Okay, so we're going to end the show as we always do. Sophia, what are you thinking about heading into the weekend?
Trump and U.S. Steel. So while he was campaigning for president, Trump said he'd block the U.S. Steel sale to Nippon Steel. This is like one of the few things that he and President Biden and VP Kamala Harris have all agreed on. They are all against this sale.
Yeah, and in case somehow you've missed this story, Nippon is a steelmaker based in Japan. They are trying to purchase U.S. Steel for $15 billion. This was a really big topic in the run-up to the election because obviously this is a really important issue for workers in Pennsylvania.
And now that Trump's been elected again, people have been watching what he's going to say about this. So he recently doubled down on blocking the sale. He got on his social media platform, Truth Social, and said that he's against selling U.S. Steel to a foreign power and that he will, quote, use tax incentives and tariffs to make U.S. Steel strong and great again, and it will happen fast. He's also been talking so much about tariffs lately.
Yeah. Also, of course, that fast is all caps and an exclamation mark.
Mm-hmm. And kind of bringing this a little more locally, there was some reporting from the Trib about how there are steelworkers who voted for Trump and are now really disappointed in hearing this from him. The overall union position is also against the sale, but there are plenty of individuals who do support the deal and have been pressuring government officials to allow it to pass and just show their support.
Yeah, I mean, I saw that Trib reporting, and one of those workers said he met Trump at a rally, and Trump told him he would take a second look at the deal after the election. So he said this feels like a gut punch. And so I think that's why, this story has been big this week. Like, Trump is saying the same thing he said before he got elected, but I think there were some workers who felt like he might change his tune. He might take what they were having to say into account. And so they're disappointed that he's kind of doubling down on this stance.
That makes sense. Reminder, the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States is still reviewing all of the details for the deal, and they're supposed to make a recommendation later this month. So they could say something like block the deal, let it pass, make more adjustments. Another thing we will keep watching. Mallory, what are you thinking about?
Yeah, I'm just going to close us out with something a little bit lighter for anyone who is into skiing or snowboarding. Seven Springs opens for the season today. So it got cold enough that they could fire up the snow machines and start making snow and open up those trails. So if you have been waiting to get on your skis or on your snowboard, now is your time. There is still no opening date for Hidden Valley, which is owned by the same company that owns Seven Springs now. So if you are more of a Hidden Valley person, you got to wait. Sophia, I am curious, have you ever been on a ski slope? What are your feelings on skiing, pro or con?
Never been skiing, never been snowboarding, slipped a lot walking on ice. So I think con, I just don't think I'd be good at it. I fall down a lot in my regular day-to-day life.
Yeah, I think this is one of those things where if I was learning for the first time as an adult, I would be terrified. Luckily, I just got this muscle memory built up as a little kid, going down the slope in the shape of a pizza. So I'm excited about this announcement. But Sophia, I think it's totally fair if this has no impact on your life.
Yeah, I'd come and just sip hot chocolate and hang out. I like hot chocolate, and I understand that's part of the skiing experience.
Yeah, that's sit in the lodge with a cup of cocoa, totally valid. That's all for today here on CityCast Pittsburgh. Our music is by Benji. Sophia Lowe, Selena C.A. Reynolds, and Elizabeth Kama produced the show this week. Francesca DeBecco writes our newsletter. Megan Harris is your usual host, and I am the show's executive producer, Mallory Falk. We will be back on Monday with more news from around the city. Have a great weekend.
Didn't realize we had a ski slope called Hidden Valley. The first time I read that, I thought ranch.